I am Clara West, and I will tell this myself. The day my grandmother Evelyn was buried, we gathered in her old brick house in Bristol, in the United Kingdom. The room smelled of tea and dust. The lawyer read the will while my brother Daniel and my sisters Lucy and Mary Ann watched closely. One by one, they smiled as they received $10 million each. Then the lawyer handed me a rusty book. Lucy laughed and called it junk. I stayed quiet, held the book, and felt calm inside. Nobody noticed my silence, or the strange warmth growing there. The lawyer stayed behind after the reading, even when the mood in the house turned loud and careless. My siblings moved through Grandma Evelyn's living room like they already owned the air. Daniel poured himself a drink from the crystal cabinet. Lucy walked around, tapping on the walls and saying what she would renovate first. Marian sat at the long dining table, already scrolling through listings for houses that cost more than $1 million. I stayed in my chair, the rusty book resting on my knees, its weight small but steady. The lawyer cleared his throat and spread out more papers on the table. He said there were final matters to complete. That got everyone's attention. Money always does. They gathered around him, leaning in, suddenly serious again. He explained that Grandma had kept personal records separate from her main estate. Journals, notes, private agreements. He said these things were not part of the cash inheritance unless claimed properly. His voice was calm, almost bored, like he had done this 1,000 times. Daniel waved his hand. He said he didn't care about old papers. Lucy laughed and said she didn't want dusty junk cluttering her new apartment. Marian asked one question, just one, and it wasn't about value. She asked how fast the transfers would go through. When the lawyer said the money would be released within weeks, she nodded and lost interest in everything else. The lawyer pointed to the last page. He said signing it would close the estate cleanly. No disputes. No shared claims. Everyone would walk away free and clear. He slid the pen across the table. I watched carefully. My grandmother had always told me that important things were never explained loudly. They were hidden in quiet words and small details. I recognized that tone in the lawyer's voice. I felt my chest tighten, not with fear, but with knowing. I did not interrupt. I did not ask questions. I just watched my siblings sign. Daniel signed first, fast and sloppy. Lucy followed, smiling as she wrote her name. Mary Ann signed last, slow but careless, already thinking about flights and furniture. Each signature felt like a door closing behind them. The lawyer collected the papers and placed them neatly back into his folder. His eyes flicked toward me for just a moment. There was something there. Respect, maybe, or understanding. When it was over, the mood changed again. The house felt colder. The laughter turned sharp. Daniel finally looked at me, really looked at me, sitting there with the book. He frowned like he had just noticed a stain on the floor. "So, what are you going to do now?" he asked. I shrugged. I said I hadn't decided. That seemed to annoy him. Lucy crossed her arms and smirked. She said I always liked playing mysterious, like I was smarter than everyone else. Mary Ann didn't even look at me. She was done with the past. Done with Grandma. Done with anything that didn't shine. Daniel stood up and pointed toward the door. He said the house belonged to them now. He said I had no reason to stay. His voice was firm, final, the way people speak when they think they have won. I looked around the room. The walls still held Grandma's photos. The clock still ticked the way it always had. The air felt full of her, even though they couldn't feel it. I did not argue. I did not remind them that love once lived here. I simply nodded. "All right," I said. I stood up slowly, slid the book into my bag, and walked toward the door. Lucy laughed again, loud and careless. She said it was sad to leave with nothing. Mary Ann finally looked up and said I should be grateful I got anything at all. Daniel opened the door for me like he was doing me a favor. I stepped outside into the cool evening. The sky was pale and empty. I did not turn back. I did not feel angry. I felt steady. The kind of steady that comes from certainty. As I walked away from the house, I thought about Grandma's hands, how they used to rest on mine when she spoke. I remembered her saying that silence was not weakness. It was choice. I remembered her smile when she talked about patience, about letting people show you who they are before you decide who you will be. They believed they had everything. They believed I had nothing. They never asked why Grandma gave me the book. They never asked what it meant. And they never realized that, in their rush for millions of dollars, they had signed away something far more valuable, without even knowing it existed. I did not open the book that night. I placed it on the small wooden table beside my bed and let it sit there, silent, like it was breathing on its own. My room was simple, rented month to month, with thin curtains and a view of another brick wall. I made tea and sat on the bed, listening to the city outside settle into sleep. I was not nervous. I was careful. Grandma had taught me that rushing ruins things that are meant to unfold slowly. The next morning, I washed my hands before touching the book. The cover was rough, flaking at the corners, and the rust around the metal binding stained my fingers slightly. Inside, the first pages looked boring. Dates, notes, names written in pencil. I flipped slowly, page by page, until I noticed something odd. Some pages were thicker. Some edges were uneven. This was not an accident. Grandma never did things by accident. Near the back, the spine creaked in a different way. I pressed gently, and a narrow compartment opened. Inside was a small, old key taped down with yellowed paper. Under it was a folded note, written in Grandma's careful handwriting. For the one who listens, it said. I sat back and closed my eyes. I felt her then, clearer than I had at the funeral. Not sadness, not loss, presence. The book was not a memory. It was instruction. I kept reading. The pages changed after that point. There were lists of addresses, account numbers, and handwritten explanations written in plain words. Grandma had not tried to sound important. She wrote like she spoke to me, calm and direct. She explained that some wealth should be quiet, that noise attracts the wrong kind of people. She wrote that she had trusted my siblings with money, but she trusted me with truth. One page mentioned a private box in a bank office in Edinburgh. Another referenced property held under a trust name that meant nothing on its own. There were notes about warehouses near the water, land outside the city, and investment accounts opened decades ago and never touched. Each entry was dated. Each one was signed with her initials. I felt my breath slow as I realized the size of what I was reading. This was not sentimental value. This was structure, planning, control. I understood then why the lawyer's voice had changed when he spoke about private records. I understood why he had watched me when the papers were signed. 2 days later, I took a train north. I carried the book in my bag, wrapped in cloth. The bank office was small and quiet, nothing like the shiny places my siblings liked. I gave my name and the key. The clerk checked records that matched Grandma's notes exactly. No surprise crossed his face. That told me everything. The box held documents, deeds, and statements. Everything was legal. Everything was clean. The numbers were larger than I expected, even though I had already prepared myself. Properties valued in the millions. Accounts holding sums that climbed past $40 million when added together. All of it assigned to a structure that transferred fully to the holder of the book and key. Me. I did not feel excitement. I felt clarity. Over the following weeks, I moved carefully. I spoke to advisors who listened more than they talked. I learned what Grandma had built and why she had kept it separate. Some properties were leased quietly. Some investments had grown without attention. Nothing flashy. Nothing loud. Wealth that worked while everyone else looked away. I also learned something else. When my siblings signed those papers, they had not just closed the estate. They had released any claim to future discoveries tied to Grandma's private records. They had agreed, in clear language, that anything undocumented at the time belonged solely to the named recipient of those records.
Me.
When the letters started arriving from their lawyers, I did not panic. I had expected them. The book had warned me. Grandma had written that people who feel clever rarely read what they sign. She wrote that anger comes after regret. I did not respond right away. I waited. When I did answer, it was short and calm. The documents spoke for themselves. There was nothing to argue. Courts do not care about laughter at funerals or cruel words spoken in living rooms. They care about signatures and intent. At night, I still returned to the book. Not to count, but to understand. Grandma had written small notes between the lines. Thoughts about patience. About choosing silence over pride. About knowing when to walk away without explaining yourself. I finally understood that the book was never about money. Money was only the proof. The book was a test, a mirror. It showed who rushed, who mocked, and who paid attention. My siblings had taken millions and lost control. I had taken a rusty book and gained a future they could never touch. And I was ready for what came next. The noise came later, exactly the way Grandma said it would. It always does. At first it was small things. Emails that sounded polite but felt sharp underneath. Messages asking for clarification. Phone calls that went unanswered when I didn't pick up right away. Then it grew louder. Letters arrived from law offices with thick envelopes and heavier words. My siblings had finally understood that something had slipped through their hands, and they were reaching for it blindly. I did not rush to respond. I had learned, slowly and deliberately, that urgency is often a trick used by people who are afraid. I continued my days as I always had. I woke early. I made tea. I walked by the water when the weather allowed. I worked with the advisors Grandma's book had guided me toward, people who spoke in facts and not feelings. Everything moved forward, quiet and steady. When the first court filing arrived, I read it once and set it down. It accused me of hiding assets, of manipulation, of deceit. I smiled at that, not because it was funny, but because it was predictable. My siblings had always believed that intelligence had to be loud, that control came from force. They had never understood patience. They had never understood Grandma. The hearings took months. I attended every one. I dressed simply. I spoke only when spoken to. The documents did the talking for me. The signatures, the dates, the clear language of release and intent. My siblings argued with emotion. Lucy cried in one session, saying Grandma would never have wanted this. Daniel raised his voice and accused me of betrayal. Marianne stayed cold and distant, as if pretending none of it mattered would make it disappear. The judge listened. Judges always do. When the decision came, it was not dramatic. It was final. The claims were dismissed. The estate was closed. The assets confirmed. There was nothing left for them to take. I watched the realization settle into their faces, one by one. It was not anger first. It was disbelief. Then came regret. After that, the silence returned. I moved a few months later. Not far, not flashy. I bought a small white house near the water, the kind of place people overlook because it doesn't try to impress anyone. It cost just under $1 million. I paid in full. The deed was clean. The windows faced the sea, and the wind carried salt and quiet into every room. I furnished it slowly. A wooden table, a soft chair by the window, shelves for books, including the rusty one, which I placed in the center, exactly where the light fell in the afternoons. I planted flowers in the garden the way Grandma used to, kneeling in the soil, feeling grounded in something real. People expect wealth to change you. They imagine sudden luxury, loud joy, endless spending. That was never my nature. Money did not make me brave or cruel or kind. It only gave me space. Space to choose.
Space to breathe.
Space to live without asking permission. I helped where it made sense. Quiet donations. Support for small places that mattered. Nothing with my name attached. Grandma believed that the best gifts were the ones that did not come with applause. I agreed with her more every day. Sometimes, late in the evening, I thought about my siblings. Not with bitterness. With distance. I wondered what they told themselves now. Whether they blamed me or fate or grandma. Whether they ever admitted, even in silence, that they had laughed too soon. I never contacted them again. Not because I hated them, but because the story between us had ended. Some chapters do not need revisiting. They are complete the moment the lesson is learned. The book stayed with me. Its cover never changed. Still rusty. Still rough. I never repaired it. It reminded me that value is not always polished, that truth often hides in things others dismiss. Grandma had known exactly who we were. She had written the ending long before any of us reached it. On the anniversary of her death, I sat by the window with a cup of tea and opened the book to the last page. There was one line I had missed before, written smaller than the rest. Walk away clean. Let them think what they want. I closed the book and smiled. I had walked away from laughter, from insults, from a room full of people who believed money was the same as worth. I had walked away with nothing they could see and everything they could never take. This was not a story about revenge. It was a story about listening, about choosing silence when noise would only cost you more, about understanding that sometimes the richest thing you can inherit is trust. And this is where my story ends, not with shouting, not with applause, but with peace, a quiet house by the water, and a book that changed everything because I was the only one willing to open it.